The views and opinions of the Jonathan Kinloch Show are not those of WADL Detroit.
Welcome to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. There's a lot going on here in Michigan, especially here in southeastern Michigan. Well, last week we touched on the fact of the issue surrounding Public Act 4. Yes, Public Act 4 has had a very horrible impact on a number of communities around the state of Michigan, but there's no place in the state where it is hitting and where it is very dominating this political discussion and community discussion than in the city of Detroit. We have on this show today, we have two individuals who are right in the thick of the discussions and one pushing back, fighting back Public Act 4 and its impact. We have Keith Johnson, the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, who is here in the studio with us, as well as Herb Sanders, who is one of the lawyers and one of the leaders of Stand Up for Democracy. This is the group that actually circulated petitions to get Public Act 4 repealed on this fall's ballot. So we have him, as well as we have a representative from a community in southeastern Michigan, Peggy Goodwin, who's a mayor pro tem elected and an all-round activist here in southeastern Michigan. So we'll be talking to them later all in this show, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. 2009, I remember that so well when the headlines read, Detroit Public Schools get an emergency manager. The emergency manager at that time was Robert Bobb. Robert Bobb came in with a lot of fanfare saying that he would address this deficit as well as turn around the Detroit Public Schools. What we're now seeing is the impact from the emergency manager in the city of Detroit Public Schools. We've seen a steadily decline in student enrollment, as well as we've seen a definite drain or dwindling of the school district's budgets. Well, now we have a new emergency manager, Mr. Roy Roberts. Roy Roberts has chosen to use a provision within Public Act 4 which allows for him to impose his will, his contract on the district employees. The power to impose is not something that rests with the emergency manager. The previous school boards and superintendents had the ability to impose contracts on its employees. But in this union town, no one ever dared use that power. Well, we got word that the City of Detroit School District is going to have roughly around, I believe, like $700 and some odd million. This is less than $1 billion. I'm so used to the Detroit Public Schools having well over $1 billion annually. We have here in the studio Keith Johnson, who is the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers. And I want to welcome you to the show. And I know you have to be quite surprised that the emergency manager, Roy Roberts, has chosen to actually impose this contract on your members.
Well, good morning. And first of all, I refuse to call it a contract. I call it an edict, because in a contract, you typically have discussions, negotiations, exchange of proposals and the like, and you ultimately come up with an agreement. That did not take place. What I find particularly discouraging is that aside from our meeting with his representatives, Mr. Roberts and I had 3 face-to-face, man-to-man, one-on-one meetings. And one of the consistent themes in those meetings was, Keith, I believe that working together we can come up with an agreement. And where I come from, Dexter Davison neighborhood, word is bond. So when someone tells me that working together we can come up with an agreement, I expect us to work together and come up with an agreement. and that is not what happened. I certainly understand the fact that under PA4, the emergency manager has the right to impose an edict. However, under Section 20A of PA4, it explicitly states that for a school district that's in receivership, such as Detroit Public Schools, that an emergency manager has among the options available to him or her to negotiate, renegotiate, or enter into contracts on behalf of the school district. So while you may have the right to exercise a particular power, you cannot hide behind that where there's a separate provision that gives you the authority to utilize another mechanism.
Let me ask you a question. There is an Office of Labor Relations. There was an Office of Labor Relations. Does that office still exist?
It still exists, yes.
And has there been ongoing conversations? I remember when I served on the school board, the unions were always in contact with this office. The contract was about to end. There has been ongoing conversations both in and outside of the district as it relates to the deficit that the school district is in. Had there been ongoing conversations with Roy Roberts' labor relations staff to the point that there was no resolution? I'm asking you. I know you had the conversation with Roy Roberts, but had you had any conversations with whoever is head of labor relations up until
Not relative to negotiations. In fact, the chief of labor relations, Gwenda Young, often reminded me that under PA4, the emergency manager was under no obligation to negotiate. And as I said, I understood that. But going back to late March, early April, I actually sent a letter to Mr. Roberts and to Ms. DeYoung with a request for bargaining, and also indicated that we could use a method that had been successful for us in the past, and that was interest-based bargaining. I never got a response other than to say that there was no obligation on the part of the district to negotiate.
Let me also ask, because we're almost out of time in the segment, is that the conversations in dealing with labor relation issues have to center around the fact of the state of the school district's finances. And with that being the case, did this discussion, what happened prior to the budget being approved? Were there any discussions with the labor relations or the school district about your contracting issues or entering into a contract prior to the budget being approved?
The only thing that would come close to a discussion, Mr. Roberts and I had a letter exchange of our proverbial must-haves. Keith, what do you need in order to move forward?
And did you provide that to the...
Yes, I did.
You provided that.
Mr. Roberts, what do you need in order to move forward? And what he sent to me was actually articulated authorities that already existed within the collective bargaining agreement.
Well, we're going to continue our discussion on the other side. We're going to bring in Herb Sanders from Stand Up for Democracy, and we're going to talk about the impact of Public Act 4, not only on the school district of the city of Detroit, but in other communities, especially in the city of Detroit with a consent agreement that's being challenged from a number of different directions. So we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. You can also catch me weeknights at 9 on News Talk 1400 WDTK, where I have a number of guests and we talk about local and national issues. It's getting very interesting as we're talking about this presidential election, so tune in weeknights at 9 on 1400 WDTK, or you can also tune in or listen to the show online at thejonathankinlochshow.com. If you're just joining us this morning, I'm having a conversation with Keith Johnson, and I was talking with him in the earlier segment about the fact that the emergency manager has chosen to impose a contract on the Detroit Federation of Teachers. So we got a little historical information as it relates to how, what led up to the point of the emergency manager imposing this contract that Keith Johnson is saying is an edict from the emergency manager. Well, we're going to bring into the conversation Mr. Herb Sanders, or Attorney Herb Sanders. Herb Sanders is one of the leaders of Stand Up for Democracy, and Stand Up for Democracy is the group of citizens and organizations that basically run around this state and collected over 200 and some odd thousand signatures to repeal Public Act 4 and have it placed before the voters in this fall's November election. Well, the Board of Canvassers for the state of Michigan chose not to certify those signatures because of font size. So it's making its way through the courts, and I believe it's now in the Supreme Court. And where it is, I'm going to actually ask Herb Sanders what's the update as it relates to these signatures that were filed, I believe, like over a month ago.
Absolutely. The signatures went before the Board of Canvassers on May 17th. It was that date in which the Board of Canvassers in a 2-2 split, 2 Republicans voting not to certify, 2 Democrats voting to certify. Ultimately, because there was no majority, the signatures were not certified. Subsequent to that, we filed a motion in the Court of Appeals seeking a writ of mandamus, asking the court to compel the Board of Canvassers to certify the signatures. The court did issue an order stating that the Board of Canvassers must certify the signatures. However, unlike in most election cases, the Court of Appeals did not give immediate effect to their order. Consequently, the clock is ticking and time is running out. The Secretary of State's office has indicated all of their due diligence must be done by August 27th in order to get this issue on the ballot. You are correct. There has been an application for leave to appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court submitted by the opposition, Citizens for Fiscal Responsibility. But as of this date, the Supreme Court has not exercised its jurisdiction. Consequently, this past Wednesday, there was a protest at the Michigan Court of Appeals to compel the court to immediately order the Board of Canvassers to put the issue on the ballot. And citizens are continuing to protest and continuing to try to compel the court to do what they need to do to allow people to exercise their right to vote.
Well, not only are citizens protesting, you also represent, I believe it's 3 citizens of the city of Detroit who have brought suit against the city of Detroit's consent agreement. The city's corporation council has chosen to ask the circuit court judge in Ingham County to revisit his previous decision of basically saying she did not have standing or the authority to ask the court to determine whether or not this document that was entered into by the city of Detroit was legal. So you have citizens who have now chosen to retain your services to bring this matter into the court. So what's going on with that litigation there?
Sure, you are correct. 3 citizens, 3 brave ladies, residents of the city of Detroit, 2 employees of the city of Detroit, 1 a Detroit retiree, have stepped up, and we have filed a lawsuit on their behalf indicating that there was no authority under the Michigan Home Rules Act nor the city charter for the mayor to enter into the consent decree. The city charter as well as the Home Rules Act says that when an entity is indebted to a municipality as the state is indebted to the city, then there can be no agreement such as a consent agreement, and the mayor cannot unilaterally determine that he wants to amend the city charter. There's a process for that. That process did not take place. Consequently, the consent agreement is void.
What's very interesting is that you not only have the mayor of the city of Detroit stepping out, speaking loudly against his corporation council, but you also have members of the Detroit City Council. Well, no, let me say members. You have Gary Brown, the council president pro tem, this week, which made a statement that that confused me. It baffled me. He's an officer of the city of Detroit, and by being a member of the Detroit City Council, he's saying that the state of Michigan should bring suit against the city of Detroit to find out the limitations, to get the courts to determine or set limitations on the city's corporation council. I don't get that. What's going on here?
Well,
it's sending out several different signals into the community, as well as it has to the leaders in Lansing.
Absolutely. I'm as baffled as you are. There was a new charter put forth. Gary Brown and the mayor had the opportunity to chime in on what that charter contained. They were so concerned about rectifying what they considered to be the Kwame situation that they didn't look into the future as to what the result of the new charter would be.
We definitely know that Gary Brown is an expert in the Kwame situation, because many of the provisions in the city charter were brought about because of the litigation that he brought on the city of Detroit. It's so amazing what's going on here in the city of Detroit, as well as over at the Detroit Public Schools. And later on, when we bring in Peggy Goodwin, I want to have a conversation about the fact that, yes, there are deficits in many of these communities in the city of Detroit, in the state of Michigan, I should say, but the state has a responsibility to make sure that communities are solvent. And so the wisdom of the legislature was to bring about Public Act 4, which I believe is overreaching in trying to get to the point of assisting communities. So I want to see the impact that Public Act 4 is actually having on other communities. And so we're going to have that discussion on the other side of this segment of how far-reaching and how are other communities dealing with Public Act 4 and the shortfall that they're having in their budgets. Peggy Goodwin will be joining us. Mayor Pro Tem-elect from the city of Royal Oak will be joining us on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. If you're just joining us this morning, we've been having a conversation about the impact of Public Act 4. We have here in the studio Keith Johnson, the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, as well as Herb Sanders, attorney Herb Sanders, who is one of the leaders in Stand Up for Democracy, the group that gathered well over 200,000 signatures from citizens around the state of Michigan to repeal Public Act 4. Peggy Goodwin is my sometimes co-host of the Jonathan Kinloch Show that airs weeknights on 1400 AM WDTK, and as well as she's the Mayor Pro Tem of the city of Royal Oak, the fun city that I like to call it, and she's an all-out active community activist as well as PR person, and she's very involved with the city of Detroit and other communities around the state of Michigan. Public Act 4 was created because the state said that the state has to be able to have the tools necessary to assist communities with their financial challenges. Well, instead of writing a check, instead of introducing legislation to cause a change in how city services are provided, the state decided to create this far-reaching law. And of course, there's no other place in the state that's feeling the hit more than the city of Detroit. Peggy Goodwin, this Public Act 4 was said that it was to assist cities that are having stresses within their financial operations. Royal Oak is also having issues, but we don't see Public Act 4 looming over you all's head.
We are headed for deficit spending in fiscal year 2013-2014. Right now, we did finish, and I liked what Keith said about what he attempted to do with Roy Roberts with the interest-based negotiation. We just finished that with our public sector bargaining units. We've got about $2.2 million in concessions, very similar to what he's imposing upon the teachers, right or wrong. A lot of the same things, 10% wage reduction, paying more into health care. However, as an elected official myself, I don't take lightly how hard it was for the Detroit City Council to vote for the consent agreement. Regardless of the way they voted, that was a very hard decision, because you don't want to see your city go into bankruptcy, but you don't want the state to take over it either. And so your choices are, I'm one vote. I am not the deciding factor for administration to come up with the deficit elimination plan that we've talked about so many times. However, it is so hard for one person to move the city forward. And you've got to join forces with the rest of your right or wrong.
Well, Peggy, as a member of the City Commission in the city of Royal Oak, you came on board to address the challenges in the city of Royal Oak. What you did not tell the citizens was that once you got to the City Commission, that you would turn over that responsibility to another entity to do your job. Also, within your power as a city commissioner is to rein in spending, is to not approve contracts. But I would think that you would take all necessary actions prior to enter into this type of agreement.
And we absolutely are. I mean, we've just finished all of our bargaining units across the board and achieved concessions.
What I'm speaking,
we've reined in contracts. We are now headed towards, because we know we're approaching this, we're going to be eliminating our fund balance altogether. We know that's coming in the next year and a half. So we're going to be approaching a millage. There's only so many ways for cities to make money, but because all of the cities across Michigan have no revenue sharing from the state anymore, we have to approach this at a state level. And I think there's room for a new discussion, a renewed discussion on an alcohol tax in this state.
Herb Sanders, you also wear many hats in this community. One of the hats that you wear is that you're part of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And a lot of your members are employees of the City of Detroit. City of Detroit sat down with you and other units of unions within the City of Detroit to come up with some concessions. You came up with those concessions. They were brought before the council. And then, wham, the consent agreement came. Was there some additional things the City of Detroit could have done before they entered into this agreement?
Well, they could have ratified the agreement that we negotiated. We had arm's length negotiation with the mayor and his administration. We agreed to terms and conditions, numerous concessions that we, the citizens, the workers, brought forth and suggested. Those concessions were agreed to by the administration, but the mayor refused to put it before City Council. City Council refused to request the package and vote upon it, and we had the strong arming of the governor's office saying, do not vote on that contract, do not ratify that contract.
Well, there's some legal challenges there. You represent 3 citizens, and we'll see what comes of that litigation. To the school district, Roy Roberts imposed this contract on your members, Keith Johnson. Is there anything in this contract that you see that is beneficial either to the district or to your members, or where do you stand as it relates to the schools opening on time in the fall? Will that imposed contract have an impact?
I'm certain it will have an impact, but I would say to you that the only benefit to the district is that there's no accountability on their part as a result of this edict that's been imposed. On the good note, we reached out to Mr. Roberts this past week. He and I had what I believe to be a productive discussion relative to going into bargaining. And in all honesty, we got some assistance from people like the mayor, from Mike Duggan, and some others in order to help facilitate that.
Well, I want to thank you, Keith, as well as Herb Sanders and Peggy Goodwin for joining me here on the show. We're gonna definitely keep our eye on these issues. Peggy, you'll be joining me next week, and Keith, I wish you all well as Stand Up for Democracy.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to the Jonathan Kinloch Show, and I hope that you're getting all the information necessary for you to be familiar with all of these very different issues that are facing us. I know of no safe repository of the ultimate power of society but the people, and if we think them not enlightened enough, the remedy is not to take power from them, but to inform them by education. That's what I hope you received from the Jonathan Kinloch Show this morning. information that will equip you and educate you on all of these issues that affect us around here. Until next week, same time, same station, have a great week.